NATO leaders say they don't want to be drawn into a war with Russia. That's also what Germany's Chancellor Olaf Scholz claims. But experts assert Russia has long been at war with the West and with Germany. Putin uses many weapons in his covert war: cyberattacks, sabotage, and disinformation. Or, the latest example, a wiretapping affair surrounding a conversation between German army officials about delivering Taurus missiles to Ukraine. It took little effort, but created maximum damage to Germany's image. Since the war in Ukraine began, the West, and especially Germany, as Kiev's second most important supporter, has been increasingly targeted by Russia's secret services. How dangerous is this shadow war, and what can be done to counter it? On To The Point, we ask, Russia's hybrid warfare, the real threat to the West? Welcome to this week's To The Point. I'm Javier Arguedas. It's good to have you with us. And these are today's guests. Leslie Schübel is an expert on Russia at Germany's Kiev Foundation. Rüdiger von Fritsch is a former German ambassador to Moscow and was also the vice president of the German Federal Intelligence Service, BND, from 2004 to 2007. And Roman Goncharenko is my DW colleague from Ukraine, currently working with DW's Russian service in Bonn. To all of you, thank you very much for being with us today. And I'd like to start with you, Leslie. How does this hybrid warfare work? And why isn't the public really aware that these attacks are constantly happening?
Well, it's basically the concept of hybrid warfare that you don't initially notice that it's happening. Hybrid warfare can be anything that helps the security or the interests of one country and destroys the ones of another country. And that means disinformation campaigns influencing elections, migration flows, as we've seen in Belarus before. So all of those war attacks are not visible with the naked eye initially, but they do have a very big impact, at least in the long term.
An impact that Ukraine has certainly felt already. Roman, you know that all these attacks have been going on for years now. You are Ukrainian, but you live here in Germany. Do you see a difference on how these types of attacks are perceived in both countries?
Well, of course, there are differences, but there are also similarities. Just to remind you, speaking about wiretapping, Ukraine had its first shocking experience, I would say, of wiretapping, where Russia was suspected to be behind it, was in the year 2000-2001, when the Ukrainian president of that time, Leonid Kuchma, was wiretapped, talking about killing a journalist, an opposition journalist, and the journalist was killed. There were protests in the country, but the result was that the Ukrainian president was discredited in the West, and the Ukrainian movement toward the West was stopped, halted. In the year 2003, Ukraine saw a Russian hybrid war on the island of Tuzla, which is between mainland Russia and Ukrainian Crimea. Russia was trying to build a kind of a land bridge. It's not a bridge, but to connect by land those two parts. And this is seen as the beginning of what we later saw, and Russia later built that Crimean bridge that the German generals of Luftwaffe were talking about, how Ukraine could destroy it with German cruise missiles Taurus. So it's a very long story. But the problem is, as you've just said, you don't see it at once. And it took a long time for Ukraine to understand that it was actually at a hybrid war with Russia. When we later talk maybe about the media, because media is the key to the hybrid warfare.
We certainly see that it took a long time for Ukraine. It's certainly also taking a long time for Germany, apparently. Rüdiger, Russia is not only known for performing these hybrid attacks, but also for executing them extremely well. Are the Russian secret services more capable, more sophisticated than their Western counterparts?
First, I think we do have excellent intelligence services in our countries. They cooperate very closely, and they are there to protect our democracies. Second, the Russian intelligence services, who are there to undermine our democracies and to protect an autocracy, are huge, they're very aggressive, they're omnipresent, but they are not always good. They too often get caught with a hand in the cookie jar. If we think of cases like the Russian services sending two spies to the UK to try to assassinate an opponent with means of toxic warfare, it took 24 hours for the internet to establish who they were, that the Russian secret services were behind it. If we think of the assassination of a Chechen leader here in Berlin in bright daylight, again, it took a very short time to establish it was the Russian secret services behind. They are not always good. And we do have good means at hand, I think, to counter that, or they do.
However, their impression is that some of the Western countries, and especially Germany, is a bit vulnerable. The so-called Taurus leaks were a particularly good example of Russia's hybrid warfare in recent times, with far-reaching consequences. Even days after being published, they continue to cause controversy within the German government and in public debate.
An explosive leak, a recording of a conversation between high-ranking German Air Force officers. They're talking about Taurus cruise missiles, which have a long range and tremendous destructive power, specifically about possibly sending these arms to Ukraine and about potential targets. For example, the Kerch Bridge, which connects Crimea with Russia and is seen by Ukraine as a symbol of Russian occupation. The Taurus revelations are a major embarrassment for Berlin. It's an insidious game by Putin, and we cannot fall for it. The recording was published on social media by Margarita Simonyan, the head of the Russian state broadcaster Russia Today. The Kremlin's response: our NATO colleagues are extremely guilty. We'll have to see how they explain this to their own public. Is the West too careless in its defense against Russian hybrid attacks?
It certainly seems so. Now, Rüdiger, reports suggest that at least one of the German military officers wasn't using a secure line. Is this more Russian intelligence or more German failure to assess the risks?
Well, whatever it was, we would be much better and much more successful if we simply obliged to the rules we have imposed upon ourselves. To use means of the digital world, of the social media, without protection, of course, is extremely dangerous. The digital world is a dream come true for intelligence services. It's like calling, if you use WhatsApp or email or Signal or whoever, or Zoom, it's like using a megaphone in a city. So we must be more aware of what's happening. We must build awareness in our countries, and we must stop constantly discussing the issues the Russian side is throwing at us. They want to keep us busy by discussing issues of what have we done wrong, or issues like, in the end, are we guilty of the Russian aggression? When I was ambassador in Moscow, I sometimes had the impression it was us who invaded Crimea. So, and that is part of Russian hybrid warfare, to keep the other side busy with discussing an array of issues. What we must do is focus on what is actually going on. There is a Russian aggression there. It's a Russian aggression against Ukraine, and it is a Russian aggression against us, against our security, our liberty, our freedom in our countries. And we must drill down the public discussion over and again to that point, and not constantly discuss what the Russians would like us to discuss.
However, the Russians are very successful in placing topics in the agenda. And in this case, Leslie, the problem with these types of leaks specifically is that they are true. It's not fake news. It's not disinformation. The conversation actually happened. How vulnerable do you see Western countries and allies to cases like this?
Well, I think the biggest problem there is that for Russia, a success is already spreading doubt. You know, unity in the West is the biggest weapon we have against Russia. And we now see, you know, that our partners reacted, well, not very amused about what was happening. The trust in Germany is going down with this, and that's already a success for Russia. At Körperstiftung, we once a year play a policy game, and last year we did play a game that focused on hybrid attacks on European infrastructure. And the first thing that our country teams, which are decision makers from European countries, talked about was European cohesion, and it went up in the air. It was really hard to keep straight with this unity, and I think that is the most important thing we have to focus on, and that is what Putin will always try to attack first.
But do you think this is a Germany-only problem, or could this also happen to France or the UK, say, or even the US?
It's definitely happening everywhere, but I think at this moment it's working very well in Germany. And those narratives also connect to other narratives. You have a distrust in the system. You will see those narratives rooting very well also with people who were against COVID vaccines. Like there's very clear correlations between groups that just don't trust what they call the official narrative, what we would call the truth. So yeah, this plays into it. So there's very easy ground for those narratives to grow and to stay in German discourse.
It's also important to note if there's a specific goal on one of these attacks. Roman, we know that Russia is trying to prevent Germany from delivering those Taurus missiles to Ukraine. How big an impact did this specific attack have on that goal?
Well, it was a huge blow, I would say, to the whole attempt of the West, and especially of Germany as a leading country in Europe, to help Ukraine, because it, as you've said, it undermines the trust. And we had not such big cases, but other issues when Germany's awareness was questioned. For example, the case of the BND officer, who is now on trial in Berlin for working for Russia. Of course, those cases add up. I think it's important to understand what you've said. Germany has been a favorite Russian playground for decades because of the ties between the two countries, because the Germans were, to a certain point, blind towards Russia. So they couldn't see certain things. They maybe didn't want to see them because it would mean breaking of ties which were decades long. Economic ties, political ties, cultural ties. So people didn't want to do that. And maybe one more point I think is important. That story with Taurus, we still don't know all the answers. But what we see is the atmosphere. Why were those officers doing such things? I think part of the answer is because there is this whole feeling here in Germany, we are not at war with Russia, which is correct. I've been talking to Fiona Hill, who is one of the best Russia experts in the West and was a former advisor to the US administrations. And she said one very interesting thing, which is obvious, but you have to speak it out. She said, we are not at war with Russia, but Russia is at war with us, at a hybrid war. And this is something not everyone understands here in Germany. I think after this Taurus issue, things will change. This is what I hope.
But there's been talk about Russia attacking Germany in one way or another, and the West for a long time. Rüdiger, you were there in 2014 when Russia invaded Crimea. You were the ambassador to Moscow. Why do you think inaction was the response? At least that's the perception. And will this change this time?
In retrospect, history always seems to be linear, but only in retrospect. If it would be linear, everybody could tell us today where China is heading and what China will be doing 5 years from now and how we should behave. We don't know. So in a given situation, you always have to deal with numerous options. You have to respond, which happened then, with strength and a clear answer, while at the same time look for solutions that could be possible to settle a given issue. Vladimir Putin, to speak about the linearity of history, didn't become president in December 1999 in order to invade Ukraine on February 24th, 2022. He is a KGB officer, and he himself has said once, KGB, always KGB. KGB officers are not trained as strategists. They are trained as tactical, operational activists. And that's what he is good at. He has always sort of 5 options at the table, and he will pursue the one where he gets through, where he gets away with. And he'll get away with where we don't take a clear stance and give a clear answer to what he is doing. And where we, in our discussion back home, don't over and again establish what the whole situation really is about. Where we fall into his traps. It's a trap of doubt he's spreading, as Leslie rightly said, and particularly it's a trap of fear he's building there. Russia has 3 traditional export goods which are successful: fossil fuels, arms, and fear. Russia is exporting fear. They are ruling the country inside with fear and repression, and they're trying to create fear in our countries to sort of influence our discourse, our discussion, make people afraid. And our response to what is happening in Ukraine and as an attack against us is led too often just by our logic. We must think in the logic of the other side. What are they up to? And where, therefore, also a sortie could be found out of the given situation.
The problem is certainly complex, and complex are the solutions. Assessing a hybrid war is difficult. It's never officially declared, and it happens, as we've heard, underground and as unnoticed as possible. Let's have a closer look at the most important activities of the Russian secret services in their hybrid warfare.
Recruiting spies or informants, a secret service classic. There are also alleged traitors like Carsten L. in the German Federal Intelligence Service. He is said to have passed on confidential information to the Russian Secret Service. When it comes to sabotage, submarine cables and other critical infrastructure are particularly vulnerable, which the example of the Nord Stream gas pipelines shows. Authorities and institutions such as the EU Parliament and the German Bundestag are being targeted by cyberattacks. Their communications have been intercepted and secret data obtained using Trojans. Election propaganda is in full swing. The European elections will be held in June, and here too there are fears that Putin could use disinformation to exert targeted influence. How can the West counter Putin's covert war?
That's, of course, the million-dollar question. I'm throwing it to you, Leslie. What can be done?
I think the most important part is education. People need to be aware of what's happening, and preparation. This is happening with the NATO. At the last summit, it was emphasized that, cyber warfare, hybrid attacks would be included in Article 5. This isn't easy. It's not always easy to prove where those attacks came from, although it might be obvious whom it might benefit. But you have to prove something like this before calling Article 5. But I think
Article 5, just to explain to the audience, just in case, it's the article that says that if one NATO country is attacked, it's at war with all of NATO countries, right?
Yes. So the others will stand on their side. And this is especially relevant for countries like the Baltics, which are very close to the Russian border. But also to us, it's happening to us every day, and we don't know when something big might be coming. So I think preparing for this, very close cooperation with our allies is vital for this. And as we see a potential Trump presidency coming back, we should be doing that within the EU and within our European, spaces of cooperation, especially right now.
Unity is important, but woman, you know that Ukraine is at a full-on war with Russia right now. What are some examples of successful strategies that can be taken even by all the Western allies to counter the hybrid war?
Well, I think that the Ukrainian cyber defense is a very good example of a Ukrainian success, because there were expectations that Russia might hit Ukraine in the cyber very, very hard. This didn't happen. I think the result is that Ukraine prepared for that. And I think the West is not yet ready for that challenge at the moment. So we haven't seen maybe major cyber attacks, but they still could come. And the example of that wiretapping of the Bundeswehr officers, high-ranking officers, is a sign that not everyone is aware of the danger that is there. I would like to say that in the field of media, we are still underprepared, I think, and Ukraine was also underprepared. When Russia annexed Crimea, it took Ukraine 6 months to kick Russian TV channels out of the networks. 6 months after the invasion. So Ukraine was not ready for that. And it's also a problem for Germany. We don't have, some Russian channels are blocked, but not every one of them, so you can still watch Russian television. And we have a huge Russian-speaking population in Germany, with German passports, watching Russian television, watching Russian propaganda. And we do not know exactly what can be done about them. So how can we better inform them and not let them be used against the German state in cases like that story with that young girl Lisa in Germany a few years ago, when the Russian propaganda tried to stir unrest in Germany. So such cases could come again.
But the question, of course, is how does Germany counter that in an institutional level as well? We know, Rüdiger, that Germany, of course, is doing things. Is it enough, though? And is it in line with a liberal democracy to, say, perform attacks like the Russian attacks?
We're weaker than the other side in exactly that area. We're, for very good reasons, we are not ready to deal with exactly the same means to counter, and that is right so. On the other hand, we must realize that, for example, Germany as a country is changing tremendously. We're a huge tanker, and we are sort of turning course slowly. We come a long way. And now we are the second most important supplier of arms to Ukraine, doing more per capita than the United States. Well, Lithuania and Denmark and others even do more per capita. And one thing that is extremely important, I think, is to have more self-confidence. Confidence into the supremacy of our system and our solutions, because we are supreme. Liberal democracies are able to change. They have an open discourse. We can elect a new government. We can change course. Autocracies are stuck with their solutions. And we see it in the case of Russia, that it's sort of narrowing down more and more. And there's just this one autocrat leading his country into the abyss. In the long run, this system can't function. He has taken his economy into a war economy. He's spending the national reserves of the country. He's losing income from oil and gas. It used to be 50% of the state budget, it's now 28%. He's spending 40% of his budget on his warfare. And he is afraid of reactions from his own people. I mean, how weak is a regime that arrests people who lay flowers to commemorate an assassinated critic? So let's have more self-confidence. We are able to withstand this onslaught, which happens in many ways, through hybrid warfare, etc., but we're able to withstand it.
How about that confidence here in Germany, Leslie? Would you agree that it's lacking and that it should be more? Some people even say that Germans are not really aware of the risks that they are into right now.
I would agree with that. I think many people are not aware of that in politics, decision-making, as well in society. And I think it's important to note that it's not only about what's happening in Ukraine. It's not only disinformation about, like, with Russia, war, Ukraine-related topics. It's anything. It's basically anything that will bring us, you know, in a discourse that is more fighting than united action. And I think that's very important to note. I would like to add to Rüdiger's point that I think, yes, we do have, well, ways to deal with what's happening in Ukraine that are superior because of our democratic background. But I think we have to remember that we're right now in a world where we have to stand up for those values. And if we don't do that, and we don't do that in a very linear way, we will lose that leverage. And yeah, I think there it goes far beyond the borders of Ukraine or Russia, but that plays into it as well. And I think that is also something that we're not aware of enough at this moment.
The ability to change is very important, but Roman, Ukrainians have complained many times about the inaction and long reaction times of Western allies. What's the perspective there on the possibility to prepare and to react to what's going on in countries that need discussion and that need due process?
Well, you can learn from Ukraine, of course, now, but for Ukraine, it's regretfully too late to be a good example. Let's maybe look at some other things that are happening, and that could happen also in Germany. Look back at the United States, the presidential campaign when Russia leaked the information from the Democratic Party to the media, to the world, trying to undermine the Democratic presidential candidate. This is hybrid warfare. Are we prepared for such an attack now in Germany? I'm not sure, but we should be. And such things happen all over the world. So it's much broader than just Ukraine. So Russia sees itself in a hybrid war with the West, with Western countries, especially in Eastern and Central Europe, but now in Germany especially. And this is why they did it at all. They tried to undermine the relationship between Germany, France and UK as the major donors to Ukraine. They knew that there were some tensions before. They didn't have to do that because Chancellor Scholz actually said we would not deliver Taurus missiles to Ukraine. He gave his reasons. So there was no reason absolutely for Russia to leak that. But they did it. Why? I think they wanted just to undermine the relationship within NATO, yes. Undermine the trust in Germany.
Yes. Do you think we're heading into the right direction with that? Did it work, or do you still see cohesion, Rüdiger?
Basically, we're heading into the right direction. The European Union is a very strong institution, a very close alliance. We've built enormous successes over the years. We must become better in a joint and unison foreign and security policy. We must undertake efforts in that sense. And as a country, we must prioritize the topics and the issues. What is important? It's security, it's education, it's fighting climate change, and it's economic competitiveness. And that is something the government and politics must overall communicate more. And if we do that, then we can focus more on the real threat we are dealing with.
Unity as the main response of the three of you is required to face these challenges. That's all that we have time for this week. Thank you so much for watching. Remember, you can participate in the discussion anytime by joining us on YouTube. The name, you know it, is DW News, where you'll find this and all our other shows. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Javier Arguedas. Until next time, take care. Goodbye.